Tesla's and Chinese car brands have been putting pressure on European car makers in this EV push. In your conversations with German automakers, how do they see Chinese competition in the industry?
Well, our manufacturers, they need to convince consumers or customers by the quality of their products. German brands are still very successful in the whole world. The transition is a big challenge for them, but I'm convinced that they will make a good job also in the future.
And how are the least competitive parts of the German car industry entering this era of electrification?
I mean, for German manufacturers, they have been very competitive by producing combustion engines. Producing one of the best combustion engines in the world was one of their business model. So it is important for them to switch to battery electric vehicles and developing new USPs. And one of them is the perfection in technology. And I'm convinced that they will be successful also in the future.
And we've heard from the European Union that they're now probing subsidies and state support for automakers in China. The outcome of this investigation could be tariffs on those cars. Do you think that tariffs are the right approach?
I do not. I'm skeptic about these discussions because we need open markets. Germany's economy depends on open markets. We need access to open and global markets, and we should guarantee level playing field, but not work with subsidies or taxes towards each other.
And do you think that this sort of probe into subsidies in China could threaten Germany's standing in China?
I mean, the policy of German economy is convincing customers by high-end quality of products, and this is what we should focus on also in the future.
And I've heard that they've called you Mr. E-Fuels, especially I saw that in some write-ups of your work in Japan. And I was curious, what do you think of the nickname of Mr. E-Fuels?
It's maybe funny, but it's due to my fight for technological neutrality. You know, we need e-fuels because we have no other solution for the aviation or the maritime sector, and also for the existing car fleet or truck fleet. There's no alternative to using e-fuels if we want to reduce CO2 emission. So I don't understand why so many of colleagues are careful towards e-fuels, because finally we need them, and we need a fast scale-up of e-fuel productions, and I'm working on that.
And going to that criticism you mentioned of e-fuels, what is your response to people who say that e-fuels divert investment and attention away from electrification?
The situation is that we actually have very few e-fuels available. As I mentioned, on the aviation sector, for instance, there's no alternative. Our biggest airline actually is using just 0.2% of e-fuels in their fleet. And at such a state, in such a situation, to discuss where e-fuel use should be prohibited is not the right approach. The best approach now is to incentivize people to invest in the production of e-fuels so that it can be scaled up and e-fuels can be available. And there are a lot of questions to answer on, like what will be the standards of e-fuels? Because we will need to import them. We are not able to produce them in Germany only because we do not have enough sustainable energy available, not now and not in the future. This is why we need to import them. And if we want to have an international trade of e-fuels, we need to have international standards for production, for sustainability and so on. And all these people who are discussing where we should have a prohibition of the use of e-fuel should better focus on how we can get a scale-up production of e-fuel so that we have enough available on the international market to be able to import them, because otherwise we will not be able to reduce CO2 emission, not in the aviation sector, not in the maritime sector, and not in our car or truck fleet. And I mean, nobody knows how many e-fuels will be available in the future. Our job now is to focus on incentivizing investments in the production, which cannot only happen in the European Union, for instance, but also in southern countries.
You mentioned the aviation and the shipping industry and how important e-fuels are going to be for those industries. Do you think that they should get preference over the car industry? When we're talking about scale, there needs to be a huge build-up of e-fuels. Do you think that the industries like aviation and shipping should be at the front of the queue when it comes to getting access to these fuels?
No, I think these decisions can be led to the market. I believe in functioning markets.
And I'm curious as well to go on to another topic. Germany is currently considering banning critical components in the 5G network of Chinese suppliers. And what do you think this is going to do for Germany's digital transformation? Do you think that this could have an impact on Germany's efforts to have a overarching 5G mobile network?
Well, first of all, the security of our mobile network needs to be guaranteed. And we are negotiating these questions in between the federal government, and I cannot anticipate the result of these discussions.
Deutsche Telekom has said that removing all the Chinese 5G components from that network by 2026, as is one of the potential timeframes, they say that that is quite unrealistic. Do you agree with Deutsche Telekom's assessment?
I know their opinion. Of course, I talk with them, but these questions really need deep discussions, and I cannot anticipate the result of our intergovernmental discussion and negotiation.
Have you also been talking to Ericsson and Nokia about the potential greater role that they could play in building out the German network if the Chinese providers are not allowed to?
Of course, I'm in contact with all the companies, and but finally, I think the discussion really is not helpful at this moment. What is helpful is to have a well-reflected decision of the federal government, and the negotiations are going on, so it's not possible to anticipate them, and I'm not able to tell you more about that now.
And as digital minister as well, you also have a remit over artificial intelligence. And I'm curious, at the moment, there are lots of different ways of looking at the regulation of AI. We have the EU AI Act, we have the G7 principles, and so there are lots of different ways of looking at it. And I'm curious to what extent you think the EU's early efforts with the EU AI Act could be overshadowed by other international efforts.
No, I think the AI Act approach is a good one. What we need is to stay innovation friendly and to regulate AI in a way that guarantees that our principal values are guaranteed. We need transparency, we need democracy and neutrality. And the approach of the AI Act is the right one. So it goes in the right direction. We support this. And at the same time, we try to find a common sense about regulation on the G7 sector. The German proposal during the negotiations of G7 digital ministers meeting in Tokuyaka was to try to have at the end of this year a kind of common code of conduct for the use of AI so that we can start with a common regulatory framework, a common idea, because I am convinced that AI has such an important impact on the competitiveness of our societies that we should try to elaborate the level playing field in between the G7 member states. And this proposal was accepted by all the other states, and actually we are working on such a code of conduct, and I'm optimistic that it will be very helpful. Finally, we will have a different approach how to regulate. Some will say, okay, this is a code of conduct, we recommend it. Others would prefer to have a mandatory regulatory framework, such as the European Union and Germany. But if the contents is close together or even the same, this would be very helpful.
And I believe the EU is pushing for some kind of government oversight mechanism to ensure companies follow the G7 guidance and the code of conduct that you mentioned. Do you expect that this is going to get sign-off in the United States, where a lot of this technology is coming from?
I think it's very helpful if we have a common code of conduct. It will be helpful because we will have a level playing field. But at the same time, it's easier for the economy also if they have similar rules, not only in the US but also in the European Union. They have easier access to bigger markets.
And do you think that Europe's role as the global regulator of tech, do you think that has any that could potentially inhibit the EU's effort to also be an innovator of new technologies?
I'm fighting for innovation-friendly regulation, but at the same time, we need AI with trust. If it's not trustworthy AI, it will be difficult to convince customers or the economic sector to use it. And what we want is to have a quick scale-up of the use of AI, but also guarantee the main values such as democracy, transparency and neutrality. This is really a key issue for us, because we need a regulation that guarantees that our people stay free in their decision as voters and also as consumers.
And it's been 5 months since the flat rate Deutschland ticket was introduced on Germany's train networks. I'm curious at this point, what have you learned about the impact of this ticket? Have you seen an uptake in train travel, and are there specific parts of Germany that have benefited from it?
Well, we had a test with the €9 ticket last year during the difficult situation of energy crisis in Germany, and then with this experience we started the Deutschland ticket, and this ticket is really a big success. It was very helpful to have all the data from the €9 ticket last year, so we could organize a perfect start of this ticket. The use of this German flat rate for public transport services is that we have much more users of public services, and the easy access convinced so many people. We have in between a few months more than 1 million new subscribers in public transport services, which is an incredible success. This ticket is very helpful also to incentivize people to switch from one mobility to public transport mobility. So multimodal mobility is much easier with such a ticket, because if you have a very difficult system of tariffs and always pay for the use of public transport services, people prefer to stay in their car or use their car for the whole trip. So with the Deutschland ticket, it is much easier to switch for a part of the trip to public transport services, or even do the whole trip in public transport services. I think this is an important step to the transition of our mobility. And a lot of colleagues, or several colleagues in Europe, they are thinking about implementing such a ticket also in their countries. When we had our last transport ministers meeting in Barcelona, we had a special meeting to share the experiences of Deutschland Ticket, and I think it will be a role model.
Are there particular nations in Europe that are considering
France is discussing about realizing a ticket for the whole French Republic, and we also discussed if it wouldn't be possible to accept even the tickets from one country to the other country, which would be a big innovation for tourists also to use public transport services during the holidays. But this will be the next step. First, we need to see how their tickets will be organized. But it will also be a challenge for the future, not only to keep the ticket like it is, but also to transform the structures of and organization of public transport service behind. The ticket is not only an easier tariff or a flat rate. It's not only a better price. It is also an invitation to the German Länder, the German states, to reform their structure of public transport. And it is also a big step to digitalize the public transport sector, because we have in Germany more than 60 local organizations who are responsible for the organization of public transports, and they do not share data, and even some of them are not even generating enough data. And I want them to share, to generate more data in the public transport service. I want them to share the data so that we can, so that we have the base for new digital mobility services, or for mobility as a service in the future. And this is a really a big project. What the customers see is the price and the flat rate, but there's a lot of work to do behind.
Mr. Wissing, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
It was a pleasure.